Hi, everyone. The purpose of our discussion today is to touch upon the new labor codes. How proactive and progressive are these labor codes? And will this change the way India Inc. will work? That is really the topic of our discussion. And I'm really happy to be in conversation with Augustus Azariah. Augustus has had a very interesting career, having started work in the area of tech sales and consulting, and also being involved with training while the IT industry was still in its very early stages. Today, with over 2.5 decades of experience in human resource function, he currently serves as IBM's employee and labor relations leader. Pretty much takes care of the entire HR function for the country and also for the regions around it. He leads public policy initiatives in simplifying labor laws, and he was actually instrumental in authoring the Unified Labor Code white paper in 2008, which was presented to the government. He serves on the boards of committees as the chairman of the Women's Empowerment and Leadership Development Committee at the Bangalore Chamber of Commerce. He is involved with the NASSCOM, the Global Workforce Management, and the Indian Society for Training and Development. He was also recently recognized as Asia's most innovative tech HR leader by HRM Asia and the Times of India. He was also awarded the Thought Leadership Award recently by the African Asian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Thank you, Augustus. We are really happy that you're participating in this conversation with me. Thanks for taking the time. Given the profile and given the number of years of experience that you had in the industry, I think we're going to receive some very, very valuable inputs from you. 29 legislations have actually folded into 4 legislations, the new labor code. So, and what has really been happening so far is that the number of labor-related legislations across the center and states consisted of about 463 statutes, in excess of 30,000 compliances, and about 3,000 and odd filings. This number is not drastically reduced, actually. So it's just marginally reduced because there are still a lot of other compliances in the labor law spectrum. But what I wanted to ask you, Augustus, is do you believe that compliance overkill has to be reduced? Okay, it could be different for IT industries, and maybe do you say that for manufacturing and the other unorganized sectors, the compliance approach has to be addressed differently?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you for having me here, Gerald, and truly delighted to be here to share some of my experiences, my thoughts, as well as my vision for the future, especially at a time when our businesses, as well as our lives are going through a very, very difficult as well as a drastic change, hopefully for the better. So to come back to your question on the labor codes, I would say yes, they have come down because earlier, let's say we were carrying 29 books, but now we are carrying 4 books. So there has been a reduction. Then your other question was, in terms of the compliance burden, right, to reduce that. See, I think I'm a strong believer that we must have compliance and controls, because this is also about caring or taking care of stakeholder value. We need to ensure that we are in compliance with minimum wage or environment or waste disposal and so on and so forth. So I think we should, but we need to simplify it. And I suppose that was one of the objectives of the public policy makers, to simplify it. And by simplification, I mean you need to bring in greater technology, or a greater focus rather on technology, not greater technology, a higher focus on technology, make sure that it's simple, it's accessible, and it's social. You can, to a large extent, upload or even see your compliance status using your smartphone.
Thanks, Augustus. I think that was a good response to the situation right now. Now, one interesting aspect that really caught the attention of a lot of people is the wage code, right? So the way the definition of wages was structured in the wage code, a lot of employers kind of got worried because they believed that their payout as a result of the new wage code is going to be substantially higher. Some have tried to come up with innovative concepts, because a lot of the wage structuring or the emolument structuring which has happened both in the IT sector, the manufacturing sector, and other sectors have largely been based on the business requirements of the business. But now with this definition coming in, and with a more specific kind of an allocation which has been provided for, do you think it's going to change a lot of the wage structuring that employers are going to be doing?
Thank you, Gerald. Now, the wage code has been the most discussed, okay? And rightly so, because, we are wondering, or the industry is also in a fix in terms of, is it going to drive up my costs? And after looking at it clearly, there are two aspects to the labor code, right? One is how your current wages are structured, and two, what should be the new structure. Now, various progressive organizations have had a very positive wage structure that reflects the similar recommendation that the government has taken. Some organizations and some sectors of the industry have followed a slightly different wage structure. And there you will see that it increases the cost. Now, where does it increase the cost is how you have designed it. Now, the most important aspect of this is bringing in, things like gratuity. Now, gratuity being payable on a yearly basis as against at the end of the 5 years maturity puts in a greater onus on the employer in terms of what needs to be paid out at the time of resignation or full and final. The other component of it is the ESI contribution. So when you bring all those allowances into one kitty or gross, then of course your contribution to ESI is going to be up. Now, for those large organizations, I think the impact is definitely felt, but in a marginal way as far as the labor cost is concerned. But there are other industries, also small and medium, where they are going to find that it is a significant cost that's going to drive up that labor cost. So overall, I would say this was a correction that had to be done. This is transparency that had to be there. This is about equity in terms of compensation. And overall, like I said, the correction is for the benefit of both the employer, employee, and the industry at large. And therefore, I think we have to take advice from consultants, because each organization has had its own unique ways of doing it, and therefore you need to have your labor lawyer or your labor law consultant to help you in terms of structuring it in such a manner that you are compliant, or in some cases organizations with very good labor practices are going beyond the compliance levels. So that is what I would recommend or advise.
No, what's really encouraging from your response, Augustus, is that you are actually calling this a correction. And I think, a lot of India Inc. is looking at it as a correction. Social security parameters have always, to a large extent in the Indian, situation, have rested with the employers. So employers have the obligation to make sure that the social security blanket, in whatever form and structure it is created for the benefit of the employee. So I think from that point of view, there is likely to be better parity. And as you rightly said, as the rules evolve, there will be a better sense of arranging some of these, the components of the wages in terms of what will be beneficial to the employee, and at the same time not really drill a hole into the employer's pocket. From there, I want to take this discussion to another interesting point. Labor codes have recognized this principle of fixed term employment. Okay. Now, there are some companies which have followed this fixed term employment, because I think by case law and some rules in some states, that recognition was provided. But today we have a statute which recognizes it. And what is going to be interesting is how this is going to be handled by the industry. Is it going to be a welcome measure from an employee point of view? Is it going to be a tool of so-called exploitation in the hands of the employer? What are your thoughts about this?
I think fixed term employment was always there, okay? And the industry used the fixed term employees because a lot of the businesses could be on demand, it could be seasonal, and therefore you need to have what I would call flexibility of workforce. So, fixed term employment definitely is welcome. And let us also be clear that fixed term employment is not about a cheaper labor cost model. No.
Okay.
It is a model for a very fixed term that both employee and employer agree that at the end of this term, I am going my own separate way. Okay. So, in terms of exploitation, would it exploit? I'm not sure because, see, as far as employment law rights and awareness goes, the workforce is pretty much aware of their rights, and you have other sources also through which they can get recourse. But if you asked me, is there a labor cost increase? The answer is yes, because at the end of FTE, you also have to pay gratuity and things like that. So there is a marginal labor cost, but this is the right thing to do because we are moving towards flexible workforce models, and I will talk a little bit more about flexible workforce models. But FTE, if you look at it, it is there in different forms in different parts of the world. This is not unique to India. This is a model that we have seen in the developed world that has actually accelerated and helped industries to meet their resourcing objectives or resourcing targets. So FTE is a model that I think organizations in the new era must adapt and pursue. Thanks.
I think that was a useful answer, Augustus. What I've also realized is that the new labor codes provide for the constitution of an employee grievance committee. I think any entity which has more than 20 employees needs to put this in place. Under the Industrial Disputes Act also, there were provisions of similar types where you have a conciliation committee and all of that. But now I think what is really happening is there is a requirement in law, okay, where the law is actually telling employers to put in place a body. And this body will have a bunch of responsibilities. They will have certain rights. They can do some things. They can't do some things. Now, this becomes tricky because a lot of employers don't want to facilitate or create a body which has certain prescribed rights under law, because they obviously believe that that will obviously get larger, and over a period of time it will lead to collective bargaining by employees and aspects like that. There is always a trigger to create new unions. Obviously, that is a fundamental constitutional right. But these are some apprehensions. So how do you see that being dealt with?
Well, that's a definite area of concern that I have heard, at least from the industry. And if you look at the industry, it continues to drive itself on mutual cooperation, employee and employer. Now, there are various systems and structures already in place for employee concerns and appeals. Proactively, there are policies and behaviors that employers drive in employees to blow the whistle or come and appeal certain things. And therefore, with all this available, and then there is also the ombudsman, right? That model is also there. So with all these there, why would you want to have a structure that might trigger, in your words, collectivism or collective bargaining? And therefore, having this memory of our legacy in the past, where it has really not driven industry as far possible as it should, we are worried that this kind of a model will limit our growth. To switch gears, India in the next few years will have 1 person out of 4 in the world who will be an Indian. So which means that out of 4 working people in the world, 1 person will be Indian. The other fact is that we have a young workforce while the rest of the world is aging. Now, if we have to be that $1 trillion economy and we want to drive the engines of the world, I would say you need to have some level of transparency, some level of involvement from the government, because this is the only way we can move forward.
So that was a very comprehensive response, Augustus, and I think it really opens out new, dynamics in the understanding of employer-employee engagement. Right. What you will see is the Social Security Code has very progressively brought in the concepts of gig worker, platform worker, and the home worker. Right. And this is really changing the paradigm of how regulators are seeing the Indian workforce in the coming future. But interestingly is that these category of workmen are still not covered either under the Industrial Relations Code or under the Wage Code. But I'm very positive that once this area of the law kind of builds, and I think the central government is the one which will come up with some of the initial set of rules for this category of employees, there is going to be a significant amount of interest in this area. So, where do you see this changing the industry going forward?
Thank you. I think this is another very relevant question, in terms of where is this gig workforce, what about social security for them, and especially driven by the pandemic, and pandemic has actually accelerated this whole thing, right? And therefore, for all those things that we were doing on the drawing board, we were suddenly thrown into this maelstrom and said, okay, let's have this remote workforce, use gig and various other things. Now, social security is an important aspect you brought about, okay? And we have seen global economies or developed economies who have gone and called the gig worker an employee. And I would say we need to be very careful about the definition that we are going to be using for this workforce. Let us be very clear that this is the autonomous worker.
Yeah.
This autonomous worker is not dependent on social security. But yes, the government needs to protect that, provide that umbrella for protection. Okay. The other one is, being an autonomous worker, they are responsible for their own growth and development, for their own safety and security, insurance, and so on and so forth. So therefore, whoever is using the gig workforce is going to cash out a lot of those things that they would otherwise be spending on social security or insurance or health or dental or training and development and so on and so forth, because the autonomous worker is going to invest that money in themselves so that they are relevant. And needless to say, as we have shifted to this new workforce model, there is an important aspect which every employer needs to do, which is called the duty of care. Now, the duty of care is about safety and security of that employee, and it's also about enabling them to perform their duty. Last but not least is that the gig workforce is here to stay. And right across all businesses, economies, and sectors, we have used gig workforce, but not in that terminology, but we've used them loosely in various sectors in the past.
I had a follow-on question about it. And earlier when we were talking, Augustus, you mentioned there is this need to upskill, right? Whether we are talking in terms of the fixed-term employee or we're talking in terms of a gig worker or a platform worker, there is a need to upskill. And what we are beginning to see today is that a lot of jobs have been lost to the advancement of artificial intelligence, to new protocols and applications which have replaced human intervention substantially. So how does fixed-term employment or a gig work or a platform worker really fit into this changing dynamic?
Let's also look at how many new jobs have been created. Okay, while you're talking about job losses, are we looking at how many new jobs have been created? Thousands of new jobs have been created because of the change in technology. Now, why did so many job losses happen? Was A, because of redundancy, and B, was because that particular skill was not as much in demand. And therefore, I bring you to a very important aspect where I speak about in my future of work thesis, where we say skills is the new currency. Now, when you say skill is the new currency, what do you do with currency? You take the currency, you keep it, you save it, and then you invest it so that it is able to appreciate. Similarly here, skills represents currency, and therefore skills is not a one thing that you have to do and stop. It's a continuum. And I think organizations and individuals will have to look at what is emerging, equip themselves with those set of skills, and ensure that they are relevant. The last part of your point, of course, was, the job losses. I will touch upon it. So, with AI, you said there have been job losses. Yes, because certain repetitive tasks have been automated. So I think it is about driving efficiencies. It's about driving accuracies. It's about reducing as far as possible the human error, so that at that level, you're able to automate and then move on to the next.
No, that's a good take on the point, Augustus. And what I was actually thinking is, as we take it forward to my next question, is largely in terms of the sensitivity which is often involved in asking employees to leave. Technology replaces people. At sometimes employees are not adequately skilled, while organizations and employers try to reskill them to the extent possible. At some point of time, we have to unfortunately pull the plug. And interestingly, what we've seen now is with the Industrial Relations Code and the reintroduction of standing orders. And I know it's more relevant to ITES companies. Several states have exempted the applicability of standing orders to ITES companies like yours. And today, I think the threshold is now, about 300 employees, after which you will have to have a standing orders. Now, the implementation of the standing orders obviously states that you set forth certain processes and certain protocols in the manner you deal with your employees. It's like the employee handbook, technically. And what becomes an issue is, the times when you have to ask an employee to leave, perhaps, right? So what are the protocols that you follow? So where do you see that fitting in the present situation, especially with companies like yours? You had comfort, you had a protocol dealing with employees in a certain way. How is that going to change now onward?
Yes, Gerald. Standing orders is something which was exempt for the IT services industry by the current government as well as the previous government. Now, why did it happen? Also, is I think it's in the interest of transparency. While there are concerns, in terms of the inspectorate, Raj, or in terms of, the employees itself, coming into a collective bargaining mode, is this a channel, to bring in that kind of a structure, which wasn't there, especially in the IT and services industry? I think those concerns are very well founded. But what is required is certain protocols. Those protocols in terms of how do you identify certain components of work types for certain employment actions. And those employment actions need to be very clearly defined. And that definition needs to be socialized with employees so that they know that, okay, if I am going to fall within this particular category, or if I'm trending into a particular category that might fall into certain adverse employment action, I can myself take corrective actions, do a course correction, or at the same time, organizations, as they bring in some of these things and comply with, let's talk about workforce restructuring under the SO Act, very clearly those protocols need to be in place, and also they do this in a very gracious manner. Okay, so there are various tools or levers that you use, in terms of how do you do your workforce restructuring. There is upskilling, reskilling, redeployment of those resources. There is workforce renewal, where you use renewable workforce, and then there is the gig force, workforce. A lot of those things are there. So it's about what levers you use. Standing orders is, I think, about bringing in a particular structure that is uniform across the country. And I would say, it should go beyond being very state specific, because organizations could have their presence in different states, and therefore, if a particular state tells, I want you to follow so many guidelines as far as leave is concerned or leave encashment is concerned, we need to have that uniformity across so that the policy is comprehensive, whether I'm in Chennai or whether I'm in Gurgaon. I am able to comply with the components or the Standing Orders Act, and very clearly I reflect the model standing orders. But a lot of organizations go well and way beyond the requirements of
true.
the SO.
So I think that's a good take on the whole idea, right? Because on one hand, there is a sense of apprehension what this legislation is likely to cause. But the way you put it is that adequate preparedness is always good. And transparency, in the way of managing all these protocols are also very relevant. In terms of performance-based management of employment, right? Do you have any perspective on it?
Yeah. So performance management has always been a big topic, right? And in today's world, both HR as well as from a practice and technology standpoint, I would say that if you have to exit people, exit them with the highest level of grace that is there, and go over and beyond what your current statute requires you to do. Okay, and of course, compliance with those particular protocols that are laid down. Now, in terms of, you specifically talked about performance improvement plans. Now, if you are applying certain technology interventions, let's say AI and ML, you will be able to get certain trends in terms of the employee. Is this person trending towards a low performer? Is this person trending to a high performer? And this is something you can get out there on your smartphone. Even the employee can get that data, using various apps, saying that, yeah, I'm probably trending low, and therefore what should be the interventions that I have to do. Okay, so in the worst scenario, let us say that the employee is definitely a low performer and you have to exit. I would still go by the age-old method of a PIP, because the performance improvement program is something both of them come to an agreement to, and then they say that, okay, this is what I'm going to learn within this particular frame of time. These are the milestones that I have, and if I fail this, I choose to leave. Okay, or in worst cases, the employer can choose to terminate for a PIP failure. Okay, so now again, the aspect of it is whether the law allows it or not. That's a different aspect. So I'm just talking to you about the practice.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yeah. So the practice is about, exiting employees in a graceful manner, especially when there are performance related issues.
So so coming to the present situation, right, Augustus, the last 14 months approximately have been very challenging for everyone in the industry. So what have been your learnings these 14 months? How have you, as people part of the HR, the backbone of managing people expectations, how have you handled this situation?
I will explain this to you using a metaphor. Okay. Now, in life, we're all prepared for a particular situation in our life, which I call the perfect storm. Okay. So as a corporate employee or a senior person anywhere, or any employee, basically, we equip them with skills and competencies and, all kinds of stuff that has to enable them to face the perfect storm. And what happened in March of 2020, the perfect storm hit us. And it hit us without much of a warning. And then we were all thrown asunder. There was chaos. And in all that chaos, we managed to scramble up our boats. Now, what happened here, you have to listen carefully, is that we were in our own individual boats, but in one storm. So we were fighting one storm in our own boats. And what came to the fore was our inherent ability to adapt. So those who adapted used their instincts, used their skills, used their competencies, used their risk-taking ability and all that to stay afloat. And they not only stayed afloat, but as they were riding in their own boats, they were helping people across. And this we were able to see. We were becoming more sensitive as a society. We were coming out onto our balconies because we wanted to socialize and, sing and do antakshari out there. So the bonding happened. There was more sensitivity. There was, at least in the society where I live, there was no discrimination or any such thing for somebody who became COVID positive. On the contrary, while that family was quarantined or isolated, the rest of the people got together to see how they can support them in coming out of it, be it sending them home-cooked food or positive messages and so on and so forth. So, to answer your question in a nutshell, I think we became very adaptable. We used our skills very well, but what we learned around all this was resilience. Now, resilience is what you need to go forward. God forbid another storm hits us. Are you resilient enough to ride that other storm? So, to be storm-proof, you've got to be resilient, you've got to be adaptable. And today, that has spawned a new type of worker or a work type whom I call the storm rider. People who have come out of that storm, who have helped others, who have engaged effectively in growing this particular community or the society, and also by putting themselves sometimes in harm's way. So which typically means that today you need a specific workforce to keep the lights on in the office, who are running your data centers, who are doing all those things. And these people, or even the healthcare workers, right? They are risking their lives and doing that. They are the storm riders. They are the people whom you have to look at differently. Different healthcare policies, higher insurance. Their own families are also going to be impacted if any one of them is infected. How are you going to handle it? So you see, you need different ways of looking at things. And this is what I call the new ways of working. The new ways of working encompasses all this, as well as what I call the employer's duty of care, to ensure that those people are equipped with the right technology and that they have the freedom to do what they want, and also to use ethical uses of workplace practices. Also, when I say ethical uses of workplace practices, there are certain unethical ways where, the keyboard strikes are being monitored. Some folks have to be sitting in front of a video camera all day. That is highly stressful. That means there's no trust in this whole thing. So you need to build trust. You need to build transparency. You need to engage more effectively. And to me, the last 14 months have been great learning. I wouldn't have learned so much in the last 5 years than now. And it has also been a completely transformative management experience. Thank you.
I think that's a great answer, Augustus. It actually, sets out so many aspects in just that few words that you mentioned. Being a storm rider, working with sensitivity and sensibility. I think all of that really is important during these times. And thanks for bringing in that perspective. During these trying times, at the end of the day, we have our human limitations and we do get frustrated. And that obviously has a consequence on our own physical, psychological, mental health, right? So during this period, we've heard a lot about mental health and the need for people to engage, to have support groups. Have you seen something of that happening in your organization, in the industry you're active in?
Yeah, you rightly said, mental health is now on the front burner. Okay. Now look at it this way, right? With working remote, working from home, you have 3 generations working in a home. Okay, and there are grandparents, then there are children who are students who are doing their online work, and then there are parents who are, constantly on their calls or doing some things like that. Now, what happens here is also there is a limitation of infrastructure, right? Everybody doesn't have a workplace that is exclusive to them. So there is a fight for the best workplace. Staying at home has brought in a lot of uncertainty. Some have had job losses. Some have had reduced salaries. Some have been forced to give up their jobs because they have to take care of the children as well as the elder care.
That's true.
Child care and elder care today are very, very clearly in the forefront. And the gender that bore the brunt of this was the women's gender,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The female gender. And therefore, if you asked me, you need to bring in a greater sense of awareness for people to go for what I would call EAP, employee assisted programs, right?
Okay.
So they can go, someone is under stress or depression or certain things, or this could also be post-traumatic. I became COVID positive,
Yeah.
and therefore, I need to go through some post-traumatic counseling, so today organizations need to create that kind of a climate, that kind of an openness, as well as the commitment that, look, this is going to be handled in confidence. Even if you go to a particular psychologist or a counselor, I, as your manager or your colleague, will not know why you are going there.
True.
So that level of confidentiality needs to be there in the employee assistance programs, or EAP.
Augustus, I think it has been a fantastic learning and speaking to you. Thanks for all your insights. We've kind of discussed some aspects of the law, some aspects of our human lives, the society at large. I think this has been a very productive conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for your patient hearing.